I want to introduce our next session. I'm Roger Payne. We're talking about preserving big brains and the new whale protection zone. Chris Clark will talk about that and then announcing the Biocomputer comparison toolkit, finding the most powerful brains on Earth. And we'll hear first from Mark on that, and then we'll hear from Ben afterwards. And I just want to start with a couple of stories, which is that one of the most dangerous things you can do, I believe, is to fail to understand what other species can do incredibly well. And I'll give you a couple of examples. There's a wonderful example I saw thanks to Amory Levins, who is a great fan of orangutans in addition to his many other talents. And he shows that orangutans, if you give them, this has been demonstrated in a wonderful film that actually Amory made. If you give them a needle and thread and a bunch of beads, they put it into their mouths, and then there's this sort of thing going on, and after a few moments, they hand you back a bracelet, which they have made by threading all of these beads using this device. And in one instance, the orangutan fails to notice that it had a bead that's missing. And the thing is given back. It is communicated to the orangutan, you missed one. It puts it back in its mouth, and it does the same thing. I'm going to give you another example. Kanzi, the bonobo who is trained, I think it's Kanzi, to look at a screen, a computer screen, and numbers appear at completely random positions in the screen. So it would be, here is the screen. It would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And Kanzi can look at this, so can you, and then they turn off the numbers, so all you see is a blank, empty screen. Back come blanks in the position of the numbers, and the bonobo goes and indicates by touching the order that these things were in. You look at it for maybe 20 seconds, and you might get to 4 or 5, but very often not to 10. When they show it to Kanzi, they shut down the period of time that he has to look at it until, I swear, it's going like that, and he gets correctly what the order was for that picture. And it's always different. The table of random numbers positions these things. So if you're looking at what is the capacity of the brain of this animal, or can't speak our language, or even perhaps has a language of its own, I think you're in the sort of danger that humanity was in when they looked at the rising of the sun, going to the zenith and coming down, and it was perfectly clear that the sun and the stars and the planets were all revolving around us, so we must be at the center of the universe. I mean, this was a totally convincing performance that fooled every human on Earth for thousands of years. And eventually, somebody finally figured out, no, that's not the explanation. It's actually that we're revolving. And that kind of mistake, I think we make constantly and at our peril. So in order to talk about the importance of what big brains can give you, because you might want to ask, why save big brains? Aren't you just saving things that have gotten us into more trouble than anything else has ever gotten life into in history, or at least faster? And so we're talking about the value of big brains and what we might, if we ever could, learn from them. And I want to start by saying, therefore, the new whale protection zone concerns a zone in the San Juan Islands which has killer whales in it, orcas in it, and the zone is one which is going, we hope, to go through in such a way that we can make a spot that is safe for whales to actually feed in, because the attention they're getting from tourist boats full of whale watchers, good idea to have whale watching, but that failure is causing a collapse in their ability to feed enough, and they're going into real problems in catching food because of all the noise. When you're talking about noise in the ocean, you're talking about Chris Clark's work. he has gone so far ahead of all the rest of us that I can't even see him anymore. He's vanished over the horizon.
Ooh.
So we'll ask Chris to go first.
The invisible man. Well, first of all, Mark, thanks for inviting me. This is always very exciting. And so I...
Look here, Chris.
Okay. Oops. How do I go back one? There
that
it is.
way.
Okay. So that's a picture taken back in 1972 when I was first got to know Roger. And he threw out this crazy idea. He actually published on it. And that was this notion that prior to modern shipping and all the noises that ships make, the songs of blue whales and fin whales, these are two of the largest animals on this planet, and yes, they have large brains, could be heard across an ocean. And that the noise from all our wonderful activity at sea was compromising their ability to hear each other and be heard. So this was an epiphanal moment for me in the sense that I was going on to biomedical engineering, and this was a little lark. I was going to spend 3 months in Argentina living in a tent on a beach. And then I learned this guy got paid to do this. So I thought, well, that's pretty cool. Not much. And so this was the moment where I jumped into the ocean and started paying more attention to listening. My brain had been thoroughly molded as a young 9-year-old to a 13-year-old because I went to the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City, and every day I had voice lessons twice a day. I sang in this edifice twice a day. I learned that I was not an Episcopalian. But my mind, so this is sort of related to the earlier conversations we had, my mind was shaped to see in sound, right? I think in sound, right? And I pay very close attention to sound. And in that cathedral, one of the things I learned when we were singing Benjamin Britten's Ceremony of Carols was that we had to sing way in the back of the cathedral. The men were singing in the regular stalls, and I had to watch through a mirror Alec Whiten, who was the master of choristers. So all the delays and all the complex reverberations in the ocean, in the cathedral, I had to learn that at 9 years old. It was a totally different language, but I learned it. And then you come out of that, and then you meet people that are deaf as a rock, right? And they don't hear things. So then I meet this gentleman, and he's talking about whales calling across an ocean. This was beyond my imagination. This was nuts, right? But it was very intriguing. And then 20 years later, I think Larry, somewhere, I think you said you just had dinner with Al Gore. Well, because of Al Gore, Stevens from Alaska, Sam Nunn, and Ted Kennedy, at the fall or the demise of the USSR, they started a swords to plowshares program, dual uses. I was invited into the US Navy's sound surveillance system and was asked if I would help if I could use this system not to track submarines, but to listen to whales. My answer was expletive deleted, right? Oh, I'm trying to find a whale that puts a sound out at 185 decibels underwater and is singing intentionally to be noticed. This is Pavarotti on the sidewalk, right? So there's that exposure. So a tool that was, for privileged information became available. And I asked the lieutenant, Chuck Gagnon, who became my friend, well, what would he do if he had a voice as loud and as low as a blue whale? He said, I could illuminate the ocean. And then I asked him if he could show me this, and this is what he showed me. This was the output, the red dot up there. That's the blue whale singing off of the Virgin Islands. The dark circular bands represent how loud that song is throughout the ocean. Okay? Notice that it identifies the continental shelf. The blue dot in the middle is Bermuda, and there's a sound shadow going north from Bermuda in which the song does not appear. And over on the right, notice all those jagged edges? That's the mid-Atlantic mountain range, the underwater mountain range. So basically, it's like, holy blip, this animal is illuminating the ocean, right? So the scale, and one of the things we're talking about here is scale. time scale, spatial scale, frequency scale, all these things, was completely off the charts, right? And yes, I listened to a whale singing 3,000 miles away across an ocean. And today, we're putting instrumentation off of Virginia and Cape Hatteras and Cape Cod, an instrument that's made in a university laboratory, costs $6,000. I can hear a whale singing off of Ireland across an ocean. I can also hear explosions from seismic air gun explosions for hydrocarbons across an ocean as well, which gets into this whole issue of acoustic pollution. This was another, eureka moment. This is a one-year voice print from the Pacific Ocean. The yellow striations at the top represent ocean storms. That's the aggregate energy from ocean storms. So I'm mapping energy over space and time. The glow in the lower right is the combined energy from a population of singing blue whales and singing fin whales. Their song, in this case, the chorus, lasts for about 4 months into January. Before this, our conception of whale songs in the ocean was completely the Flat Earth Society. It was almost equivalent to thinking we are the center of the universe and everything else revolves around us. When you see this, you go, oh, I'm pointing to the screen, I can see. It's like, oh my gosh, they're out there. And one of the revelations is that today, almost all marine animals, whales, seals, fish, shrimp, they all hear and produce sound. Everybody, the whole trophic level, all the way down. If you want to survive in the ocean, you better use sound, right? Some of these animals are at the peak, the actual pinnacle of central nervous system capabilities. So the killer whale there in the lower right is the epitome of large brain, highly complex vocal repertoire that you and I cannot comprehend. They have a 10-fold or 100-fold expanse in their auditory perception. They can produce 3 sounds simultaneously. Can anybody in here in this room do that? Right? So they're mapping the ocean with sound. And this is where, Roger, I shared this notion of, if I asked all of you to imagine walking out of this room and being home or someplace, you could close your eyes and you could see that, right? It's called the mind's eye. Now, when I track a blue whale or I follow a killer whale acoustically, a blue whale can barely see its tail 90 feet away, but it can communicate across an ocean 3,000 miles away. So they have a mind's ear. So their auditory cortex is about an order of magnitude larger than a relative species on land, right? I'll jump ahead. Okay. You can tell I get pretty passionate about this. One of the biggest problems we have, and Larry, this again was sort of the question I asked you yesterday, I think it was yesterday, maybe it was this morning, is that interface between exploration, discovery, and how do you make this available to the population as a whole, of people? Because what we're trying to do, what Mark and I are trying to do with killer whales, we have to inform people who do not know a decibel from a hertz, from a centigrade, from a Fahrenheit, right? But they're making the decision. So visualization is the key, all right? Animation, motion through time. We love motion through time, right? So what you're seeing here is I'm going to show you this animation. This is off of Boston. So Cape Cod's there, and this is the shipping lane coming in and out of Boston, and LNG ships are coming in and out of Boston, big ships. And what you're seeing, those large meteorites of glowing there, that's the acoustic footprint of a commercial ship. And the little starry glows, this is the sort of Van Gogh thing. That's the acoustic space over which right whales, an endangered species, can communicate, okay? So what's happening is when the light of the whale disappears under the acoustic footprint of the ship, that animal loses all its ability to hear and be heard. That's it. That's it. They might be able to see their tail, but they cannot be. So you've basically wiped out their acoustic space. Oh, now can you play? There we go. Okay. So this is sped up, and it's a couple of days in the life, and you'll see that thing that's glowing and constant. That's an LNG tanker that's offloading LNG, liquefied natural gas, into Boston, and it's using bow thrusters, so extremely loud, right? So this is when I played this to Jane Lubchenco, because I was trying to explain what the impact is of all the shipping traffic on the acoustic space.
The head of NOAA.
She was the head of NOAA at that point. And I showed her the movie. She gets it. Another example, if I can keep going here.
Well, you go ahead.
I'm way over my time. But another example was in Glacier Bay. Have any of you been to Glacier Bay National Park to see the killer whales and the humpback whales and whatever? It's a beautiful place. So we had a meeting, and I should mention that first animation I told you, it took about 6 weeks to actually produce, to get all the parameter settings right and whatnot. So the first time we made the cake, it took 6 weeks. This one I'm going to show you took a day. I was in an airport. I called back to my technician. I said, this is what we got to do. We're going to make an animation that shows, don't show it yet. The plot on the left, shows the acoustic space of Glacier Bay. The little glowy things are the humpback whales that are singing and moving around in the space. The scientists there told me we have 19 whales, blah, blah, blah. And on the right is the acoustic space, and I'm going to put all the ships that come in, the cruise ship that comes in, and the superintendent was having to make a decision. Am I going to let in more cruise ships? You get $25 a head tax per person on the ship, goes to the national park. So there's a financial incentive, let more ships in. So let's play it. And you're going to see the difference between ambient noise and humpbacks and ship noise and humpbacks. So those are relatively small boats coming into the space. Those are 300 passenger type things. And now you're starting to see the throbbing glow of the cruise ship. And here's the cruise ship. So those whales' voices are disappearing underneath the smog and the pollution of the ship. So the head of the national park of Glacier Bay is sitting there in the front, and her boss has flown in from Fort Collins, Colorado, and this is going on, and the superintendent says, this has been a fantastic conversation. I've learned so much from all you scientists about my park. But I'm not a scientist. I'm a lawyer. And then she pointed at this and she said, but I understand that. No statistics, no histograms, no single lines moving across it, no dynamics, right? She got it. That's what it took, the animation. So Mark, this one's for you. Next slide. So Mark challenges me, or actually we were just having a great discussion, and he said, well, what's happening in Puget Sound? These whales are being overrun by love of ecotourism. All these little boats like gnats are just coming around. So this is the same thing, like the humpback whales. On the left-hand side, you see the glow. This is a pod of 6 killer whales moving through the Puget Sound, and they're going to come by Friday Harbor. And then you're going to see the ecotourist boats come out from the 3 ports. And we have about 24 ecotourist boats coming out. We know what they look like, sound like. We know what they do in terms of movement. And the panel on the right is going to show you the acoustic space. That's the blue area surrounded by the red. You're going to see that shrink and ebb. And on the bottom, I know this is a little nerdy, but you guys are all brilliant, right? You can follow this. The blue line on the bottom is the acoustic space that the whales have under no ecotourism conditions, and the red or the orange is what happens when all the ecotourist boats. So can we run that? Okay, here they come. No boats have come out. Now you're going to see some little boats come out. There they come. See them? They're like gnats. And notice the space, and notice how much of their opportunity to communicate goes away. We know that they're already losing 25% of their foraging efficiency, of their caloric intake, because of all this activity.
Which means that something has to be done about it. Mark, I think we'll turn it over quickly to you to introduce that and the fact that it takes a big brain and...
Right. Thank you, Chris. Very cool.
Great.
We've spent about 20 years, since 97, looking at these whales and their behavior and where they eat and what they eat and how they eat. And the west side of San Juan Island, which was pictured there, it is the primary, if you overlay all the things you can think of, where they need to rest, where they eat, so on. We've done this, we've worked with nymphs to do this, and there's a 6-mile stretch, about 3/4 of a mile deep. If you could make that into a protected area, a whale protection zone, you would be providing them with a place where they would probably be able to survive, given what you've just shown us. And the primary cause of death, which we were the first guys to really show, is starvation. They're starving to death. And I've started to think of this primary protection area as a death zone. They come to where the fish are, they go through what you just showed, and they have a negative caloric balance, and they starve, and they die. Mm-hmm. So, it'd be good to turn the death zone into a protection zone.
Yeah.
And when people ask why, it's like, well, it could be a dog, could be a cat, why do you care? And in the world, these animals have big brains, which is what we're about to talk about. And their brains are 4 times the size by weight of our brains, whatever they're doing with them. And they're resident, so they've been declared a subspecies that is endangered. They are unique in the world. Although they exist all around the world, only in 2 places, right there and slightly north, are there resident pods of whales. If there ever is a time when we could learn more about them and want to have some kind of interaction, it's going to be there. Mm-hmm. So it's not just because they're cute. They're dying because they're cute. It would be a shame if we killed them because they're cute and didn't save them because they're brilliant.
Right.
Here. Yeah. Great. That goes to you, Ben.
Yeah. Well, so,
Oh, wait, one more thing.
please.
So as a lead-in to for all of time until now, human biologists have looked at brains in such ways that it makes us look pretty good. And the math for this is really simple. You don't look at the brain itself. You divide it by body weight. That's an old trick. And in that way, we look really like the top kids in the block. This is ridiculous. And the single proof of this is if you look at a brontosaurus, it had 2 brains the size of a walnut with a body bigger than this building. So clearly you do not have to have a big brain to have a big body. If you stop that silliness and you start asking, what about biocomputers? Just call them biocomputers instead of brains. Mm-hmm. And if you're a Martian, you came to Earth, you want to say, what's going on here? I'm interested in computer design. And I'd like to know where are the top 20?
Yep. So I think it's a great model of saying, rather than think of it as a brain, which is something we have some sort of intuitive sense of, you say it's a biocomputer. We're interested in how do we design flow computers, right? I think everybody here is convinced we need to be much better at having flow processing computers. I would argue the body does this. The brain is incredibly specialized at doing this. And these whales are doing things that we have no idea how they're doing it. They are brilliant. They are really mysterious. And so having an opportunity to say, how do we start to compare all of these really impressive, big, powerful biocomputers in some quantitative way so that we can learn architecturally how are our brains doing these things, right? Because they're not just general purpose computers. It's highly specialized architecture for very specific tasks. Processing sound bouncing off of mountains is very different than making words, is very different than painting, right? So how do we learn what are the features that actually give us flow computational power so that we could maybe emulate that and, if nothing else, appreciate it, right?
Right.
Sort of a naturalist, so appreciation's still just big for me. But so this, can we show the table, the next slide? This is, super informative spreadsheet. And this is our...
Too small.
This is our toolkit. Well, you don't have to read it. I told him not to worry that it's small. You can't read it anyway. What we're looking at is species as rows. So it's a bunch of different whale species, and at the bottom...
Could we zoom in on the left-hand columns there and just kind of, is that possible?
So you can see the parts we know. We know then across the top variables, right? And these are things we have to come up with. This is a discussion. So this is not a toolkit that's ready to use. It's the idea that it's a toolkit that we could build.
Right.
And we have all of these empty cells. And so I'm saying things, you can't read them, but brain weight, and you find a dead animal, you weigh its brain, you've got the brain weight. So that part's easy, that's great. I already talked earlier about the importance of dynamics in biological processing. So we can count static things, so how many neurons, but of course that density changes across the brain, so how many where. What about glia that are supporting the neurons and shaping them? How does that play into it? And then there's dynamics, there's plasticity, there's short-term remodeling of synapses, there's very long-term remodeling of big connective arcs that happen, for example, as you're developing. How do we start to quantify all these different features that define the neural architecture and the neural capability that is, in fact, the only model we have of really big, powerful flow computers?
Right. These are, though you couldn't see it, Bruno, sorry about that, but what you're seeing is the top 20 brains on the planet, or biocomputers on the planet, by weight. So we're pulling out the idea of dividing by body weight and just showing you the biocomputers. Mm-hmm. And then what we've done with the help of Lori Marino, who's also a doctorate in neurophysiology, is we've started to list these columns as objectively as we can in the way that Benjamin's describing. So this will be crowdsourced, I think, with other scientists.
It sort of has to be, right?
Yeah, right.
It's a lot more than any one of us can do.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So over the course of years, we'll fill this out, and we'll start, for people in this crowd who are interested in computers, we'll start to show that there are a bunch of computers on this planet that are really, really good at things, maybe different from us, and instead of just saying the human brain is the only model for creating a computer, I suspect that they're going to change their mind and start looking at orca or other animals as ways of designing massive new computers.
I think we have a chance for just one question, and while whoever is coming up to the microphone who would like to ask that question, I just want to remind us of a a difference in our own species that seems to go undiscussed often in places where it damn well should be discussed. And I'm talking about something that is sort of summarized as the little woman's intuition. And the simple truth of the fact is that the connections between left and right hemispheres in a woman are 150% of what they are in a man, suggesting that they can make connections that the rest of us can't, the male rest of us can't. And so when you look at just sheer anatomy, you get an idea of something that could make us, I don't know, more intelligent if we simply realize, no, it's not just the little woman's intuition, it's an ability to make connections that we can't make.
Roger, there's one more.
Yep, sorry, Mark.
In line with this, let's forget about body weight. Yeah. There's one more thing that fits with it. John Lilly, who I think you guys both knew, was at one time a well-known student or researcher into this question of language in whales. And he started asking, why don't humans have bigger heads? And why do dolphins have bigger brains? And he looked at it anatomically, and he did some torque tests on the human neck. And he found out that if you had a bigger head, your neck would break. And so I think we've got it completely backwards from what you'd be taught in school today. And the way to think about this is the brain is the most important part of your evolutionary response to survival. It is expensive calorically, and we pay for everything we can pay for. Yeah. Any animal has the largest brain it can afford. And so instead of saying brain to body weight, it's the body is the platform that allows a bigger and bigger brain as the body gets bigger and bigger.
Bless you. We have 15 seconds.
Because I want to eat too. You may have actually just answered the question. My question was going to be why are we doing it by weight? Why not some other metric like power, efficiency, whatever I'm sure there's a bunch of other metrics I haven't thought of, but why weight? But it sounds like your contention is, well, because the whole point is how big can you get it?
I think raw weight is a much better measure than people have allowed it to be, but it's only a start. And so we're only showing that because we have the data. But as Benjamin's described, there are all those empty columns which would address what you're asking.
Exactly.
Thank you all.
Whole feature set.
That's great.
Whole feature vector. Yeah.
Fun.